In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the general functions of the brain, review the differences between the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and review the basic anatomical directional terms and planes most commonly used in the study of the brain. Before we dive into the functions of the brain, I would like you to think about the role your brain plays in making you who you are. We often take for granted the role that our brain plays in shaping our personality, our intelligence, our empathy, language, and our ability to do basic functions like sleeping, feeling sensations, and moving our body. Take, for example, the two images on the left here. Brain tumors and strokes can damage certain regions of the brain, leading to visual impairments, cognitive changes like memory loss, difficulty speaking, personality changes, and even death. Most of our understanding of the brain has come from studying the effects of brain damage. One of the most famous cases was Phineas Gage. Phineas Gage was a railroad worker back in the 1800s. One day, while working on the railroad, there was an explosion, and before Phineas could react, an iron rod had shot upward through his head, right through the frontal lobe of his brain. To everyone's surprise, he lived and eventually recovered physically, except for loss of vision in his left eye. However, he did display some personality changes. Prior to the incident, he was described as quiet and respectful. After the incident, Phineas was described by some as being vulgar, disruptive, and having little social etiquette. Although the severity of his personality changes has been debated, one thing that we do know is that the frontal lobe is very important in shaping our personality and social awareness. The brain is the most complex plastic organ in the human body. To demonstrate this, let me show you a short video about a woman named Jody. When Jody was a little girl, she suffered from frequent seizures. Seizures are caused by irregular electrical activity within the brain. Doctors decided to remove the half of her brain that was causing the seizures, and this video shows you what happened.
I have half a brain. When people meet me, they have no idea. I only remember my very first seizure. I was at my daycare playing, and the next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance.
We hightailed it to the hospital and just watched her. She had another seizure the next morning, but nothing that they did worked. She was constantly falling to the left, and it got so bad that one of us had to be on her left side all the time.
It was to the point where I was having seizures every 3 minutes, and that wasn't cool.
The doctor explained that the only way they could treat it was to take out the half of the brain that was affected.
In very, very early childhood, the brain is thought to be in one of its most plastic states. And if you change the brain at that point, there may be a better capacity for the brain to reorganize.
I am a very positive person. A lot of times I'll joke that they took out the mean side of my brain and they only left the happy side.
If you had asked me 25 years ago if it was possible to take out half the brain and still have functioning life, I would have said you've got to be crazy. But here we are.
Life now with half a brain is, for me, is no different than anybody else. I've been married 4 years. I live on my own with my husband. I'm really glad my parents did what they did, because I wouldn't be where I am now if I had had the surgery any later or had waited any longer.
As you saw, Jody was able to learn to walk and speak and live a normal life despite half her brain being removed. One thing I would like you to take away from this video is that the brain is flexible. However, this flexibility tends to be greatest when we are a child. If Jody had half her brain removed as an adult, then she would not have been able to make as remarkable of a recovery. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the brain to change throughout an individual's life. Your brain can grow new connections, and the more you use those connections, the stronger they become. However, since our brain is more plastic when we are younger, if you form bad habits when you are younger, they become harder to change as you get older, which explains why many of us struggle to break old habits. If you are interested in the brain and the mind, I have 2 books to recommend to you that I really enjoyed reading. The first book dives into the world of neuroplasticity. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself and is by Norman Doidge. The second book explores somewhat bizarre neurological disorders and is called Phantoms of the Brain and is by V.S. Ramachandran. To demonstrate to you how much your brain influences your perception of the world, let's do 2 quick experiments. First, I would like you to stare at this image. Does the rectangle in the center appear to get darker on the right? Most of you would probably say yes. Well, in reality, it's all just one shade of gray. Your brain is tricking you into perceiving it as having a gradient because it is compensating for the gradient in the background. Let's do one more experiment. Which appears darker, A or B? Most of you probably said A. Well, in reality, they both are the same shade of gray. If you think I'm tricking you, then let me show you. As you can see, your mind is trying to interpret the shading in the middle, and therefore it creates the illusion of the top being darker. Now that you are familiar with the role that your brain plays in your life, let's list some of the general functions of the brain. Your brain is responsible for controlling basic functions, including initiating motor outputs. These motor outputs may be voluntary, like moving your arms and head. Or they can be involuntary, like controlling the smooth muscles that constrict your blood vessels, dilate your pupils, or speed up digestion. Your brain is also responsible for receiving and processing sensory information, such as vision, taste, sound, smell, touch, temperature, pain, and proprioception. Proprioception is your sense of awareness of the relative position of your body parts. For example, I can close my eyes and touch my nose because of receptors in my elbow joint telling my brain where my hand is located relative to the rest of my body. Your brain is also responsible for higher level functions such as thinking, planning, decision-making, language, personality, emotions, memory, sleeping, and dreaming. We will discuss how your brain accomplishes all of these functions later on in this chapter. Before we review the differences between the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, you must be familiar with the parts of a neuron. Neurons are composed of a cell body, also known as a soma, which contains the nucleus. On one end of the cell body are projections called dendrites. Dendrites receive signals from other neurons. When a neuron receives a signal, it sends an action potential down its axon. Axons usually have fatty cells wrapped around them. These fatty cells form something called a myelin sheath that insulates the axon so that it can transmit a faster electrical signal. At the end of the axon are small knobs called terminal buttons. The terminal buttons release neurotransmitters onto the dendrites of other neurons, therefore passing the signal along. The little space between the terminal button of one neuron and the dendrite of another neuron is called a synapse. The nervous system is divided into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The brain and spinal cord are considered parts of the central nervous system. The neurons of the peripheral nervous system extend out into our entire body away from the central nervous system and therefore are on the periphery. Although neurons are found in both the central and peripheral nervous system, different terms are used to describe them. In the central nervous system, bundles of several nerve fibers or axons are called tracts, and tracts are found in regions of the spinal cord and brain called white matter. These areas appear white because of the fatty covering over the axons, similar to how fat appears white on raw chicken or bacon. Clusters of neuronal cell bodies within the central nervous system are called nuclei. Nuclei are found in regions called gray matter because they appear gray. Nuclei are important in integrating and processing information, and tracts are important in transmitting that signal to another location farther away. Bundles of axons in the peripheral nervous system are called nerves, and clusters of neuronal cell bodies found in the peripheral nervous system are called ganglia. Therefore, ganglia are analogous to nuclei, and nerves are analogous to tracts. Now let's test your understanding of what we just covered. Pause the video and try to match the correct term with each description. Now let's go over the answers. Bundles of axons in the peripheral nervous system are called nerves. Bundles of axons within the central nervous system are called tracts and are found in the white matter. Clusters of neuronal cell bodies within the peripheral nervous system are called ganglia. And finally, clusters of neuronal cell bodies within the central nervous system are called nuclei and are found in the gray matter. There are two major groups of cells that make up your brain tissue. These are neurons and glial cells. Neurons are responsible for receiving and transmitting signals to other cells via electrical and chemical means. On the other hand, glial cells, which are also called neuroglial cells, are basically any cell in the nervous system other than neurons. They function in support, immune defense, neural repair, and regulation of signals. The glial cells you should be familiar with are Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. Schwann cells wrap around and insulate the axons within the peripheral nervous system. And oligodendrocytes wrap around and insulate the axons within the central nervous system. They each wrap around the axons in slightly different ways, as you can tell from the picture. The next type of cell you should know are called astrocytes. Astro means the shape of a star. Astrocytes are the largest and most abundant glial cells of the central nervous system. They help form the blood-brain barrier. We will talk about the blood-brain barrier more later in this chapter. And finally, we have the ependymal cells. Ependymal cells line the ventricles of the brain. Ventricles are large cavities in the brain. Ependymal cells assist in the production and circulation of cerebrospinal fluid, and they form the barrier between the blood and cerebrospinal fluid in several locations in the brain. Here is a picture showing the arrangement of cells in the brain. Let's start over here. Here is the cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebrospinal fluid is found in the ventricles of the brain, and you can see that it is lined by the ependymal cells. Over here is the brain tissue itself. You can see the neurons, which have myelinated axons surrounded and insulated by oligodendrocytes. You also have capillaries in the brain that supply nutrients and oxygen and remove waste. Surrounding the capillaries are the astrocytes. They're providing a barrier around the capillaries to regulate what substances in the blood enter the brain tissue. Now let's test your understanding of what we just covered. Pause the video and try to match the correct term with each description. Now let's go over the answers. Neurons receive and transmit signals to other cells via electrical and chemical means. The term that refers to any cell in the nervous system other than neurons is the glial cells. Oligodendrocytes insulate the axons of neurons in the central nervous system. Schwann cells insulate the axons of neurons in the peripheral nervous system. Ependymal cells line the ventricles of the brain and assist in production and circulation of cerebrospinal fluid. and astrocytes wrap around the capillaries in the brain and are therefore partly responsible for forming the blood-brain barrier. The final thing we are going to look at in this video is a review of anatomical terminology. Let's start by looking at the directional terms. To differentiate between front and back, we use the words anterior and posterior. Anterior or rostral means toward the front in the direction of the forehead and nose. Posterior or caudal means towards the rear in the direction of the spinal cord or back. For example, your ears are posterior to your nose. Now let's look at the directional terms to differentiate top from bottom. Superior means close to the top of the head or above. Inferior means closer to the feet, or in other words, below. For example, my forehead is superior to my nose. We also have directional terms that describe the location of a structure relative to the center or midline of the body. Medial means toward the midline of the body. Lateral means away from the midline or towards the side. For example, my ears are lateral to my nose. The final pair of directional terms we will look at are terms that describe whether a structure is more outer or more inner. The term superficial is used to describe a structure closer to the surface of the body or more external. Deep means closer to the inside, or in other words, more internal. You could say your ribs are superficial to your heart, or your heart is deep to your ribs. There are 3 anatomical planes that you will typically see of the brain. A coronal or frontal plane is a vertical cut separating the front anterior and back posterior parts of a structure. In this coronal section, you can see the head has been cut vertically into the front and back half. In a transverse or horizontal plane, a structure is cut horizontally, separating the top superior from bottom inferior parts. Here is a transverse cut of the head, so you are viewing the inferior part from above. A mid-sagittal or median plane is a vertical cut separating the left and right side down the middle. Here is a mid-sagittal cut of the head. You can see the right and left side have been separated. Understanding these anatomical terms is essential when orienting yourself around the brain. Can you guess the directional terms that best describe each of the views of the brain on the top row? The first is a lateral view of the brain. You're looking at the right side of the brain from the outside. Second is a superior view of the brain. You're looking at the top of the brain from above. The third is an inferior view of the brain. You're looking at the bottom of the brain from below. Can you guess what terms describe the sections of the brain on the bottom row? The first is a mid-sagittal cut through the brain. This means the brain was cut vertically down the middle, separating the right and left half. You're looking at the inside of the left half of the brain. The second image is a coronal section of the brain. This means the brain was cut vertically, separating the anterior and posterior half of the brain. You are looking at the inside of the front half of the brain. The third image is a transverse section. This means the brain was cut horizontally into a top and bottom half. You are looking down at the inside of the inferior half of the brain. To continue learning about the brain, watch the brain lecture part 2.